Hello everyone. I'm Dr. Priya Singh, Assistant Professor in the Department of Pathology at AIIMS Mohali. In continuation of the basic course in biomedical research sessions being organized at AIIMS Mohali, I welcome you to today's talk on selection of study population. In today's lecture, I will be talking about steps to select a study population, inclusion and exclusion criteria, difference between internal and external validity, and problems related to non-response. As we all know that the ultimate objective in epidemiology and research is finding the real condition or circumstance that exists in the large collection of patient or population. However, it is not feasible to study the entire population that the investigator has in the mind in research question and on whom the results of the study are intended to be applied. So, the researcher draws a study population which should be representative of the target population and of adequate size and acceptable cost. Let us take an example. If you want to buy 1 quintal of rice, to check its quality, first you will preferably buy 1 kg of rice packet. That is, you drew a sample from a target population which is representative of the target population, of adequate size and acceptable cost. Then, if you are satisfied with the quality of the rice cooked, you will draw a conclusion about the entire population, that is 1 quintal of rice, and accordingly decide whether you want to buy it or not. So today, we will discuss how the researcher goes about through all this process. So coming to the population, it is an aggregate or totality of all the objects, subjects or members that conform to a set of specifications. While the target population is the total collection of all subjects or units of study that the investigator keeps in mind while drawing her sample and on which she proposes to generalize her results. It is often very large, difficult to define precisely, and more conceptual in nature. It is defined by the investigator's study question or objectives and the clinical and demographic characteristics. While the accessible population is a subset of the target population from which the researcher proceeds to take the study sample. Accessible population is defined by similarity to the target population and geographic and temporal characteristics. So here you can see this is the total population, and when a researcher decides to do some research based on the research question, he uses specific clinical and demographic characteristic to obtain a target population. That is, collection of individuals about whom we want to draw conclusions. On this target population, researcher applies specific temporal and geographic characteristics to obtain accessible population. And a subset obtained from this accessible population by appropriate sampling method gives you a sample population. For example, if a researcher wants to study the relationship between screen time and low visual acuity in school-going children, he, based on his research question, will use certain demographic and clinical characteristics, that is, school-going children with low visual acuity, to obtain a target population. And from this target population, he will obtain accessible population using geographical and temporal characteristics. That is, for us, maybe it is easy to study school-going children with low visual acuity in Mohali district. So, from this accessible population, we will draw a sample by the various sampling methods which were already discussed in previous lecture. And the study will be performed on this sample which can be comprised of subjects, research participants, or informant. So this population can be a community population, which is a true population-based sample. It is used for public health and clinical practice in the community, but it is difficult and expensive to recruit. However, when the research question involves patients, it is known as clinical population, and source of study subject in such cases are hospitalized or clinic-based patients. Now, actually, how the researcher obtains target population and accessible population is through eligibility criteria. So these criteria specify the characteristics that people in the population must possess in order to be included in the study. These criteria are inclusion criteria, which is defined as the key features of the target population that the investigator will use to answer their research question. Typical inclusion criteria include demographic, clinical, and geographic characteristics. While exclusion criteria are defined as features of the potential study participants who meet the inclusion criteria but present with additional characteristics that could interfere with the success of the study or increase their risk for an unfavorable outcome. Common exclusion criteria include characteristics of eligible individuals that make them highly likely to be lost to follow-up, misscheduled appointments to correct data, provide inaccurate data, have comorbidities that could bias the result of the study, or increase the risk for adverse events. Common errors regarding inclusion and exclusion criteria include using the same variable to define both inclusion and exclusion criteria, selecting variables as inclusion criteria that are not related to answering the research question, and not describing the key variables in the inclusion criteria that are needed to make a statement about the external validity of the study results. It is very important that investigators not only define the appropriate inclusion and exclusion criteria when designing a study, but also evaluate how those decisions will impact the external validity of the results of the study. So, a lot of emphasis is being given to the validity. So, what actually is the validity of a research study? Validity refers to how well the results among the study participants represent true findings among similar individuals outside the study. It applies to all types of clinical studies, including those about prevalence, associations, interventions, and diagnosis. The validity of a research study includes two domains. First is internal validity. It is the extent to which the observed results represent the truth in the population we are studying. These are not due to methodological errors. They examine whether the manner in which a study was designed, conducted, and analyzed allows trustworthy answers to the research questions in the study. And it also examines the extent to which systematic error is present. There are extraneous variables that can undermine the internal validity of an experiment, and some of these threats to the internal validity of a study are history, maturation, testing, instrument decay, statistical regression, selection, and attrition. To increase internal validity, investigators should ensure careful study planning, adequate quality control, appropriate implementation strategies, including adequate recruitment strategies, data collection, data analysis, and sample size. So, from a population, we select a sample on which we perform a study. And when the results of the study are obtained, we generalize those inferences back to the population. So, if we are able to generalize the inferences to the population, the study is also said to be externally validated. So, for example, if you are boiling macaroni and you want to check for the softness of macaroni, whether it has been cooked properly or not, you take out few pieces of macaroni from the pot of macaroni and you check whether it is soft or not. If you find it is soft, you apply this inference to the whole lot of macaroni in the boiling pot that they have also been cooked. So, if in reality all of them are cooked, it means that your study can be generalized. So, external validity refers to the extent to which the results of a study are generalizable to patients in our daily practice, especially for the population that the sample is thought to represent. Lack of external validity implies that the results of the trial may not apply to patients who differ from the study population. This could lead to low adoption of the treatment tested in the trial by other clinicians. Threats to external validity includes Hawthorne effect. It is the behavior that is displayed by participants just because they are aware that they are involved in a study. Other threats include type of sampling method selected, validity of the research instrument, and predictive value of the research instrument. External validity can be increased by using broad inclusion criteria that results in a study population that more closely resembles real-life patients. In the case of clinical trials, choosing interventions that are feasible to apply. Replications counter almost all threats by enhancing generalizability to other settings, populations, and conditions. So, when we conduct a research, the truth in that study is known as internal validity. And if the truth in the study can be generalized to the truth in real life, that is known as external validity. If a study is not internally validated, it can never be externally validated. For example, if you want to check hemoglobin of adolescent females, you collect blood samples of the patients and take the hemoglobin. But by any chance, if there is error in the measurement of hemoglobin and the results obtained are not correct, that will mean your study will not be internally validated. So, if the results are not internally validated, you cannot apply them to the external population. So, that means your study will also not be externally validated. Now, coming to the concept of non-response, it refers to the people or households who are sampled but from whom data are not gathered. These are the types of bias that occurs when people are unwilling or unable to respond to a survey due to a factor that makes them differ greatly from people who respond. These are the mistakes one expects to make in estimating a population characteristics based on a sample of survey data in which, due to non-response, certain types of survey respondents are underrepresented. The causes can be request for sensitive information, email invitations, or wrong audience. Disadvantages of non-response bias. It invalidates the results of an investigation or research. It may result in higher variances for the estimate since the sample size the researcher ends up with is lesser than what was expected. It may lead to inconclusive research and compromise the generalizability of the study. The various methods to increase response are use of incentives, personal and repeated contacts, adjusting the questionnaire design, and post-survey adjustment techniques including imputation and weighting. So, to conclude, when a researcher decides to conduct a study based on the research question and he specifies some clinical and demographic characteristics, and using those inclusion criteria, he selects a target population. From this target population, an accessible population is obtained by applying specific temporal and geographic characteristics and based on the feasibility of the researcher. From this accessible population, a sample or a subset is drawn applying various exclusion criteria and appropriate sampling methods. The sample thus drawn is representative of the target population of adequate size, that is, large enough to reduce random errors and bias due to non-response and loss to follow-up. Now, when the study is conducted, we obtain certain results which we consider are true for that study. That is, the truth in the study is known as internal validity. And when those inferences can be generalized to the target population, that is truth in real life, it is called as external validity. Even if we study repeated samples of the same size, drawn in most representative manner, no two samples are likely to give us same result. When results of any sample likely to be same as truth with exist in large population from which samples were drawn. This is due to the phenomena called as random error. But as the sample size increase, we are more likely to get near to the truth or reality that exists in total population. So, the sample selected should always be representative of the target population and of adequate size. These are the references which I have used. Thank you.